John, it's always a pleasure to speak to you. Thank you so much for coming
Thank you.
back.
It's good to see you again.
I want to start with this, kind of on a sad note. Charlie Kirk, very prominent conservative activist, he was assassinated. We still don't know what happened yet, but I couldn't help but notice, and everyone else for that matter too, that the multi-billion-dollar funded FBI and its investigative divisions really have no clue what they're doing. And I had thought that the trade-off for just completely shredding the Bill of Rights, destroying our Fourth Amendment, was so that the NSA and the deep state could prevent or at the very least track down the threats. But they can't really do that, can they? It seems like they're too busy using those kind of authoritarian surveillance tools to crack down on Israel's critics rather than any actual threats to the homeland. I'm wondering if you get that impression as well.
Very much so, actually. Very much so. I thought that the FBI looked really, really bad in this Charlie Kirk situation. So we should say about Charlie Kirk too. It is whether you agreed with the man or not, whether you liked his politics or not. This is an absolutely unacceptable under any circumstances response to a man exercising his constitutional right to freedom of speech. I have to tell you, I was shocked at a series of polls that came out earlier this week, publicized by the Stanford University Center for the Study of Extremism, that found that 34% of American college students believe that using violence is justified when you disagree with somebody's speech. That frightens me deeply that a third of college students would think it's okay to just start firing when you don't like what somebody's saying. It's, it, I don't even have words to explain how wrong I think this is. With that said, you know, we saw a cast of characters in the hours after Charlie Kirk's killing, where the only person who really made any sense was the governor of Utah, who had the least amount of responsibility in the actual investigation. The FBI didn't know what it was doing. The Cash Patel said that they had the subject in custody and then they released him. They have another subject in custody. They released him too. It's like, buddy, who's advising you? First of all, just shut your mouth and do your investigation. You don't need to run in front of a camera every time there's development in the case, especially in the immediate aftermath of a crime. It's clear that we really don't know the facts. You don't know the facts. Your people on the ground don't know the facts. We found the gun. Well, you found a gun. It hasn't been tested yet. You don't know if it's the gun. Little things like that. It was like amateur hour over there at the FBI. You've got the campus police, and it apparently never occurred to them that maybe somebody should, just to make sure nobody has broken into this building that's been closed since April for renovations, to make sure that nobody's climbed to the roof and maybe has a high-powered rifle up there. You know, it just never occurred to anybody. I mentioned on a podcast yesterday, did it occur to nobody at the Utah Valley University Police Department to put a $25 drone up in the air just to take a look at the overhead? My kid has a $25 drone with a camera that's better than the one on my phone. And it never occurred to a cop to just send a drone up? What do they do all day long? By the look of them, you know, besides eating donuts all day. So yeah, it's like everybody dropped at every step of the way. Now, I think that we all got very lucky when this young man's either family or family friend turned. At least there's that. People with a conscience do the right thing, and he'll get his day in court. But man, this was just wrong in every aspect. First of all, it should never have happened. And then once it happened, it shouldn't have taken so long to get the right guy into custody.
Right. Well, I completely agree with everything you just said, especially the kind of disturbing reactions to, his assassination. This is someone who made his whole life and career about open debate. He went to college campuses and debated people who completely disagreed with him. Um, based on his principle that that's how you resolve arguments in America, through open discourse and not through bullets. And I completely agree. It's sad to watch people endorse, um, violence in that way.
Friends of
I,
mine are on
yeah,
social media endorsing violence, like unequivocally endorsing violence. It's like, have you thought this through at all? So what you're saying is if somebody disagrees with you, it's okay to shoot you. You know, if they determine that, oh, you're spewing hate speech because you're liberal or whatever, it's then okay to shoot you. I just don't understand this attitude at all. It's just my position. This just seems like an obvious position that most people would want to take, that violence is never right. It's just never right unless it's in active self.
right. And I agree with that. And I'll say something that's concerning as well as on the other side, the very predictable reaction now is to, blame a certain group, whoever their
Right,
political enemies are, and demand
right.
an immediate crackdown on them. You had Laura Loomer saying that they need to round up, arrest, and investigate all leftist organizations in America.
Yeah,
Donald Trump, unfortunately, echoed. Exactly what she said in the speech that he gave the night of Charlie Kirk's assassination, where they
yeah.
said they're not just going to go after groups that fund political violence, but merely support it through their free speech. And you can only imagine what sorts of groups the very pro-Israel Trump administration will go after with that. And I'm wondering if that's something that concerns you. It does seem like every single tragedy that we have in the United States, whether it's a Charlie Kirk assassination or 9/11, which I also want to ask you about in a bit, it's immediately exploited to do the sorts of authoritarian crackdowns, mainly from the security state against, the general population and anti-war dissenters. That
Mhm.
you are, is that something that concerns you as well?
Yeah. It's my experience that, the deep state or elements of the deep state will always seek to capitalize on a situation like this. Um, Laura Loomer is unhinged. How in the world she has access to the highest levels of government is a mystery to me. This is a woman who is banned for life from from Uber, from Lyft, from Target, from Twitter because she's unable to live in polite society. And somehow she has the ear of the president of the United States. I normally just dismiss anything Laura Loomer says as the rantings of a crazy person. It pains me that President Trump then repeats some of what she says. It's just absolutely 100% inappropriate. But you know what? I'm not worried that we're going to start seeing a crackdown on progressive voices just because this is that rhetoric that we hear spouted all the time that just kind of falls by the wayside. And no court in America would uphold, as Laura Loomer called for yesterday, the banning of the Democratic Party. Like seriously, how do you embarrass yourself every day with a new pronouncement of lunacy? I just don't understand it. With that said, federal law enforcement, intelligence, sure, they're gonna make the most out of this. And just like they did with the Patriot Act. Now here we are 24 years after the passage of the Patriot Act. I would have thought that much of it would have been deemed unnecessary by this point, and much would have been either reformed or sunsetted in ongoing legislation. It hasn't been. We still have NSA, FBI, CIA, and any number of other federal organizations spying on American citizens and carrying out warrantless wiretapping. No longer does the FBI, for example, have to go to a judge and say, I want a warrant for this guy's metadata. Now all they do is just go to the ISP and buy it. It's for sale. And so why go to a judge when you can just, pay $1,000 and get everything that Harry's been doing for the last 6 months? So we're in a dangerous position right now. May I add one other thing too? And that is that I'm also taken by the hypocrisy that we've been seeing the last couple of days. I have conservative friends jumping up and down. They're apoplectic that anybody would support the killing of Charlie Kirk, and nobody should. But these are the same people who were laughing at Paul Pelosi and who started this rumor that this was a lover's quarrel between two secretly gay men that got out of hand, and one tried to beat the other with a hammer. It's like, no, it was an assassination attempt for political reasons. But a lot of my right won't admit to that.
Right. That's also absolutely true. And as you said, the terrorist threat of Al-Qaeda is no longer there, or actually,
Right.
rather, we're friends with them now in Syria, which
That's right.
but the threat's
Ridiculous.
no longer there at all. But the programs that were invented to take on those terrorists are not only still around, but they've expanded.
Hmm.
And it all started really with 9/11, which I want to ask you about now. It's been nearly a quarter century since the 9/11 attacks, and like the JFK assassination, the Martin Luther King assassination, and other major events that reshaped this country, the federal government continues to keep some of the most important facts and findings completely classified from the public. More than that, there's been an active effort to conceal and distort aspects of what happened. Sandy Berger literally stole and destroyed classified 9/11 documents. He never went to prison for it,
Nope.
while whistleblowers who, merely disclosed information in the public interest like yourself did go to prison. My question is, how have your views on 9/11 changed over time, and which individuals or governments do you believe were responsible?
Yeah. Wow, that's a good question. Yes, my position has changed over time. I still believe that Al Qaeda carried out 9/11, but I believe now that Al Qaeda was allowed to carry out 9/11, not necessarily by the United States. The Bush administration was foolishly focused on China at the time instead of on terror, despite the fact that the likes of George Tenet and Richard Clarke, the Deputy National Security Advisor for Counterterrorism, were shouting to anybody who would listen that Al Qaeda was going to attack us. But then at the same time, what was the role of the Saudi government? When the 9/11 Commission just elects to not investigate the actions of the Saudi government or the actions of individual Saudi intelligence officers, that raises a red flag. When the CIA will not permit CIA officers to testify before the 9/11 Commission, will not permit members of the 9/11 Commission or their investigators to interview Guantanamo detainees, what do you have to hide? It's a commission. It's a blue ribbon panel appointed by the President of the United States. Let them do their investigation. And it's not just the Saudis, it's the Israelis. If the Israelis have the Iranian government completely infiltrated, they have the Syrian government completely infiltrated, and Hezbollah and the Houthis and God knows who else, all the Palestinian factions. You mean to tell me that they knew nothing about Al Qaeda and nothing about Al Qaeda's planning for 9/11? I don't believe it for a second. I think the Israelis had a vested interest in allowing the 9/11 attacks to go forward because they knew that the American response would be to go immediately to war and kill as many Muslims as we possibly could. And that's exactly what happened. And nobody's ever answered for that.
So I want to break that down a little bit piece by piece. And I want to start with one of the most mysterious characters in all of this. It's a man named Ali Muhammad. He worked for Egyptian intelligence, American intelligence. He actually trained at Fort Bragg. And he eventually made his way into Al Qaeda's network, where he trained with some of the hijackers, and joined the Al Khifa Mosque in Brooklyn. In 1993, he was arrested in Canada by the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. And after calling the FBI, he was very bizarrely released. Later that year, his proteges at the Al Khifa Refugee Network perpetrated the original World Trade Center bombing, and investigators later found his own Fort Bragg manuals in their home. Ali Muhammad himself later participated in the 1998 embassy bombings. He was arrested then, and under the George W. Bush administration, he disappeared off the face of the earth. Nobody knows where he is. Uh, who is Ali Muhammad? Who did he work for, and where is he now?
I don't think any of us really know the answers to any of those questions. And this is the danger of not having robust human intelligence available to you. Starting in the 1990s, the CIA wrongly began to focus on developing ELINT, electronic intelligence, thinking, well, we've got all this money, we're swimming in money, we should use it to buy a dedicated satellite or two or five or 10 or whatever it was. And instead of continually training new officers how to recruit spies to steal secrets, we relied more and more on electronic intelligence. Well, electronic intelligence is not going to give you the same quality of intelligence that you would get from a guy standing in the room. So with Ali Muhammad, I can speculate as to what happened because I've seen this happen in other cases. When I had seen it when I was in the CIA, and that is that the CIA handler is being played. Right? The only way, if you're in CIA operations, the only way to get promoted is to recruit spies to steal secrets, right? Now, maybe those secrets are going to save the country. Maybe those secrets have to do with Austria's corn harvest. Yeah, whatever. That's how you get promoted, by recruiting spies to steal secrets and then reporting those secrets back to CIA headquarters. And I can't help but to conclude that Ali Muhammad was recruited, but not really, that he played his CIA handler to allow the handler to believe that he had recruited him. And in fact, he was probably working as something of a double agent for Al Qaeda. Look at it this way: what would he get personally? What would he get by being a double agent? He would get to learn exactly what it was that the CIA was interested in. What was the CIA focused on? How much did the CIA know about planning 93 attack on the World Trade Center, for the 1998 embassy bombings in Africa, or in the run up to 9/11? What could he learn? What tactics could he master? Thus, the Fort Bragg documents. And how could he help to facilitate the implementation of the 9/11 attacks? I think we were played. I don't know whatever happened to him. I remember, did you and I have a conversation about him 6 months ago or so? I talked to somebody about him,
Yeah,
and
we talked briefly
I
about
think
it
it was us,
after
yeah.
the yeah.
And I don't think anybody, I mean, outside the CIA knows what happened to him. He's just kind of disappeared.
So it's been reported that Ali Muhammad spoke fluent Hebrew. What explains that? Why would an Al Qaeda operative speak Hebrew?
See, this comes back to my argument that the Israelis likely had Al Qaeda infiltrated and didn't tell us and denied when we asked them. Um, This is also something else that more sophisticated terrorists will do. The Israelis are well known, for example, for the absolutely perfect, flawless, dialectical, accentless Arabic that they speak. And not only are they trained to speak Arabic like an Arab, they're trained to speak Arabic like a local from certain villages, using the same idiomatic Arabic, the same local and regional dialects. You would never know that they were Jewish and that they were Mossad or Shin Bet. You would think, oh, that's Mohammed, the guy from the bakery in, Nablus or whatever. You'd never know it. If anybody's interested in this kind of thing, you should really, really take the time to watch the Netflix series Fauda, Fauda. 4 seasons, you'll never regret it. And you'll never look at the Middle East the same way. But it's highly unusual for an Arab to speak Hebrew, fluent Hebrew. Now you'll encounter, cab drivers, shopkeepers in East Jerusalem that speak good Hebrew, but it's Arabic accented Hebrew. The fact that Ali Muhammad spoke Hebrew without an accent makes me think that he was an intelligence officer.
We now know that the Alex Station, the CIA group that had tracked bin Laden since 1995, kept extremely tight security around his group's file. They limited FBI investigators on numerous occasions, mainly regarding the alleged hijackers Khalid al-Midhar and Nawaf al-Hazmi. In the 9/11 Commission report, the failure to share intelligence about those hijackers is treated just as accidental, but that's not really
Oh,
believable.
no. Listen, I was the chief of the counterintelligence branch in Alex Station. I didn't have access to those files. It was not accidental. There was a policy decision made early on that we will not cooperate with the FBI, period. And then 9/11 happened.
Why would they do that? Why would they break protocol? And I have just one example I think is a very important one, and it's amazing. And there's really dozens of these that come to mind. But when monitoring the famous Malaysian summit of Al-Qaeda operatives, where they devised the planes attack, Alex Station member Tom Wilshire blocked the effort of an FBI agent to notify his superiors that 9/11 hijacker Khalid al-Midhar had a U.S. visa in his passport. He then falsely dispatched the rest of the CIA to just falsely tell them that he had actually shared that information with the FBI, which he had absolutely not. Even worse than that, Alex Station broke CIA protocol and failed to watch list any of the participants of the meeting in Malaysia, the one where, again, Al Qaeda devised the attacks on the United States. Why did the Alex Station group and the CIA just protect these 9/11 hijackers in this way and shield them from the FBI? I just don't understand that.
Oh, there are several reasons, none of which will make any sense. So, number one, the CIA and the FBI hated each other back to 1947 and the creation of the CIA with passage of the National Security Act of 1947. Hated each other to the point where, as a matter of policy, there was no cooperation. I can't tell you how many times we had a development in a case, whether I was working in the counterterrorism center or elsewhere in the building, where I was specifically instructed, don't tell the FBI. I remember when I first joined the CIA, something came up where an American citizen came up in an investigation I was doing, and I was told, okay, you should probably inform the CIA. I said, okay, how do I do that? Do I write a memo to the? And they said, no, there's a CIA officer on the second floor in room whatever, 234. I went up there, and it's one poor slob sitting in a cubicle, and his job was just to kind of sit there like this and wait for somebody in the CIA to decide to cooperate with him that day. That was it. Number one. Number two, the CIA had a very arrogant notion that they could recruit the hijackers and turn them, double them back against Al Qaeda. That was ludicrous, of course. Really, all they had to do was inform the FBI and pick them up.
Whose idea was that?
Oh, that came from the top of Alex Station. It was a number of people.
So
I
Richard Blee.
probably I can neither confirm nor deny that Richard Blee was in Alex Station. But yeah, I mean, listen, most of these names have been reported um, over the years. You'll probably get them right if you do 5 minutes of reading into it. But yeah, there was this very arrogant leadership at the top of Alex Station deciding we're right, the FBI's wrong. We're going to do it our way. We can recruit these guys. We can double them back, find bin Laden, send a rocket to kill him. Don't tell the FBI.
So I guess that would explain, I guess, many years of withholding information. But as you told me last time, and I've heard you say other times before, Cofer Black said the lights are blinking red in August, in June, and July, and that was at the top of the CIA. What explains them continuing to withhold that information, even as the warnings got even more severe in the lead up to the attacks?
So I'll answer that with an anecdote. In 1990, whenever it was, 1992, 1993, a Pakistani man by the name of Mir Amal Khanzi was in the turning lane getting ready to turn into CIA headquarters. He was the first car in the turning lane. The light turned red. He put the car in park. He got out of it with an AK-47 and started going car to car, killing every man. He skipped the cars with women. When he ran out of bullets, having killed two and wounded seven, he got back in his car, drove to Dulles Airport, and flew to Pakistan on a one-way ticket with no luggage. Okay? So, as you can imagine, everything in the CIA came to a halt. Everybody who we could spare started the investigation to find Kanzi and bring him to justice. We located Kanzi after a period of several months in a flea bag hotel in Quetta, Pakistan. And so the CIA is not a law enforcement organization. The FBI is. So we located him in the hotel. We told the FBI he's in room 123 of the hotel. We surrounded it. The FBI went in and they grabbed him. Okay. Time magazine was a thing at the time. Everybody read Time magazine. It was the news magazine in the world. And they had a picture of Kanzi, and the headline on the cover was Miriam Al-Kanzi, How the FBI Got Their Man. I cannot tell you how that enraged senior CIA officers because the FBI had their heads up their asses. They had no idea where Kanzi was. We found him. We tracked him. We spent millions upon millions of dollars carrying out operations to locate him. And then we just turned him over to the FBI because they had arrest powers. The CIA was not willing to let that happen again. They wanted credit for what they were doing. They believed they could get to bin Laden through the hijackers because they believed the hijackers were weak and could be recruited. So, best to keep the FBI out of it. We turn the hijackers, we double them against the Al-Qaeda leadership, we kill the leadership, we save the country. The FBI had nothing to do with it. And that's just not the way it worked out, clearly. This was a terrible idea.
I have one final question. It's pretty related, I think. Cofer Black spent a lot of time in Uzbekistan, which I guess no one ever talks about that country.
Yeah.
Richard Blee too. They were training a lot of security forces over there. There's also, of course, major oil interests in
Yep.
Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, all the countries that the CIA was heavily involved in after the breakup of the Soviet Union. PNAC as well had a major interest in those countries. They wanted to establish forward bases there. Uh, and obviously, as I mentioned, the oil interests kind of overlap. Why was Cofer Black going over there, and what were the objectives of training the security forces in that country?
That's a good question. A complicated one. 9/11 offered us an opportunity to establish uh, intelligence liaison relationships with countries that we would otherwise never have had any reason to talk to, like all of the Central Asian stands. I can't tell you how many times I heard people say, "Oh, I have to go to Kyrgyzstan. I have to go to Tajikistan." And we're like, "What? To do what?" Well, we're going to start liaising with them. Well, by the time we began attacking Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan, we had forward bases in all of these countries. And when we made it clear to them that we're gearing up to go to war, hot war with the military and hundreds of thousands of people, and we want bases in your countries, and we're willing to pay you cash for them, everybody agreed. But there was another thing that people don't talk about. I'm sure you've heard of Craig Murray, the former British ambassador to Uzbekistan. Craig Murray is, in my view, a global human rights hero. Craig Murray was the British ambassador to Uzbekistan, and he happened to be at a meeting at Uzbek intelligence service headquarters, and he heard a man screaming. So he went to the room where the screams were coming from, despite the fact that his, Uzbek colleague kept telling him, no, no, don't go there, don't go there. He opens the door, and there was a man being literally boiled alive in oil. Boiled alive. Craig said that his skin melted off of his body as they lowered him into the boiling oil. And the CIA station chief was standing there watching it happen. So Craig reported this back to the British Foreign Ministry, the Foreign Office, and they told him to come back to London for consultations. So they said, look, we can play this one of two ways. You can keep your mouth shut and become British ambassador to Denmark, which I'm sure your wife and kids would absolutely love. Or you can keep talking about this, be fired, be prosecuted, and never work again. And he went straight to the papers and told them everything. Now he never worked again. He's a sort of part-time journalist, a commentator. He's constantly being harassed and arrested and detained and grabbed at the airport and passport revoked and all kinds of stuff. But what he did was absolutely heroic. We wouldn't have known that the CIA even had a presence in Uzbekistan, let alone one where they're torturing prisoners by boiling them alive in oil, along with Uzbek intelligence authorities. But that was one of the reasons why Kofor was going to these countries. It was to establish these kinds of relationships in countries that really didn't have a free press, in countries where there were no Americans or other journalists to pick up and report on these stories, places where we could send prisoners that no one would suspect, and then no one would ever hear from the prisoners again. Those were the kinds of relationships that he was cultivating.
I want to ask you about something that you just mentioned, which is these liaison activities. The CIA has a long tradition. Is my microphone on?
Uh-huh.
Oh, it is. Sorry. Um, they have a long tradition of liaison activities, just operations conducted in partnership with foreign intelligence services, militaries, militias, just any organization that's capable of surveillance or violence. And in practice, the CIA often relied on these relationships because, they do create a degree of separation between the U.S. government and, the often illegal covert activities of the CIA.
Mhm.
Iran-Contra's a good example. In the aftermath of the Church Committee in the 1970s, when the CIA was supposedly reined in under Director Stansfield Turner, George H.W. Bush and other operatives turned to outside cutouts like the Bank of
Mhm.
Credit and Commerce, arms dealers like Adnan Khashoggi, even Israeli intelligence, to just keep doing what the CIA had always done, only further off the books. And I could see why, in the short term, that CIA officers might view those kinds of liaison agreements as useful. But my question is, does anybody inside the agency ever stop to consider the long-term risks of liaison activities that by disclosing your most sensitive operations to a foreign intelligence service, which has its own separate national interest, you're just handing over America's darkest secrets, giving those governments leverage, even potential blackmail material over the United States itself?
No, they don't consider it. They don't consider it at all. There's this deeply held belief that we're the good guys and we're the hegemon and we can do anything we want. And when we do something, it's because we're the good guys and we're doing it in the cause of righteousness. So there's no deep introspection into CIA operations, into counterterrorism, for example. There's never what they used to call a hot wash to really examine closely the decisions that we took and the results that came out of those decisions. They just never, and another part of the problem is that people move on every 2 years or 3 years. And so oftentimes somebody will come up with an idea, it's implemented, he moves on to something else, somebody comes in and replaces him, the operation continues for years, and in the end, you don't even remember whose idea it was in the first place. So it's like there's oversight, but there's not really oversight. Besides the fact that Senator Frank Church, who you mentioned a moment ago, Congressman Otis Pike, Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan, Senator Ted Kennedy, they're dead. They're dead and gone. And there's nobody with any guts to really stand up to the CIA on Capitol Hill and say, you can't do that. It's illegal. No one has the guts to say that.
I want to ask you a few questions about Israel at the end, or now, actually. um, So Ben Shapiro, who's very close with the Israeli government, he's actually arguably, I would say, more loyal to it than his own country.
Hmm.
He assures us that Israel just completely stopped spying on the United States in the 1980s with
Yeah,
the Jonathan Pollard affair.
that's a
Um,
lie. That's
yeah,
the official Israeli answer, but that's a lie. Yes.
right. That's the official Israeli position, and I feel sorry for anyone that's gullible enough to believe that. Uh, as we've talked about before, Israeli intelligence operations against the United States are extensively documented and just so numerous that our own intelligence agencies consider Israel to be a national security threat on par with Russia and China. Um,
Yes, literally, it's classified as critical threat for counterintelligence, which critical threat countries also include Russia, China, North Korea, Cuba, yeah, and
right.
Israel.
And I want to get into some of the more recent, more prominent examples of Israeli counterintelligence against the United States and what they reveal about, our supposed strategic ally and how it treats its primary sponsor, starting with an incident in the late 1990s that happened while you were at the CIA. In 1997, the FBI opened an investigation into what they called a senior U.S. government official who they believed was passing highly sensitive information to the Israeli government. The NSA intercepted a secure communication between senior Israeli intelligence officer in Washington and their superior in Tel Aviv that referred to someone that had the code name Mega. Did we ever find out what that was about? And
No.
no, we did
I,
not.
I
What?
I remember that, and what's funny, not funny, haha, but funny, unusual, is that this happens few years, not necessarily with Israel, but with other countries, with Pakistan, for example, or with China or South Korea. And by God, the FBI drills down to the very foundation. And usually an indictment is delivered, or somebody loses a security clearance, or there's some kind of public fallout. In the case of Mega, there was nothing. We never learned who this person was. We never learned what the information was that was being passed to the Israelis, but it was crystal clear that the Israelis had recruited an American official, and the American official was passing highly classified information back to the Israeli government.
And what did the CIA think at the time? Was there anyone active on that case?
Counterintelligence investigations are the most tightly controlled, highly classified cases that exist. The CIA may have been involved in the investigation up to its neck, but they would never have.
Right. Yeah, and Mega could have been so many things in the 90s. So many things were named Mega, like Mega Oil or Jeffrey Epstein's Mega Group. There's a lot of possibilities.
Or
Um,
it could have been computer generated because most of the code names are computer generated. There's what's called a digraph. Everything begins with a two-letter digraph. Like, for example, if there's a an agent recruited to, I'm making this up, to report on counterproliferation. The digraph will be AB, and then the computer generates a code name. So if I recruit you to report on this, you're going to be AB Grasshopper, right? It has nothing
yeah.
to do with grasshoppers. It's just the computer spat that word out, and so that's your code.
Let me ask you about the big one. The Office of the National Counterintelligence Executive issued a report in the spring of 2001 on what they called Israeli art students who tried to illegally gain access to a bunch of federal buildings. A bunch of them were arrested and found to have counterfeit visas. A number of them actually lived in Hollywood, Florida, on very, very close on the same block, in fact, as Muhammad Atta and some of the other
Ah, my
9/11
God.
hijackers. After that report was issued, federal officials arrested and detained about 140 of the Israelis, deported them. After 9/11, they deported another 60. There was a famous Fox News report by Carl
Yeah.
Cameron on it. The
Yep.
DEA wrote a classified memo about the Israelis. It's 60 pages long. Um, it details all the intelligence collection being conducted by these so-called Israeli art students at Tinker Air Force Base, trespassing at Camp Douglas, dozens of other restricted sites. Uh, some of these intelligence connected Israelis were then seen documenting and videotaping the 9/11 terror attacks from New Jersey. That's in the FBI report.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, who were those Israelis? What are they doing in the United States? And why were they surveilling and around the perpetrators of the 9/11 attacks?
It's funny that you asked that because this was a topic of conversation at an event that I went to last night. We talked about the dancing Israelis who were arrested and held for several months. They had falsified visas. But when the New York City Police Department first stopped them in a white panel van, they kept saying, "No, no, we're friends. You don't want us. You want the Arabs. The Arabs are the enemy. You should focus on the Arabs, not us. We're friends. We're Israeli." Well, they were spies. They were Israeli spies. And this is what the Israelis do. They do the same thing the Russians do, the same thing the Chinese do, the same thing the Cubans do. They infiltrate American society, especially around military bases, especially around U.S. defense contractors, and they just steal everything they can get their hands on. But it also comes back to this point that I made earlier in this show and last night at this event that I just told you. And that is that the Israelis are not content with us giving them 99% of our weapons and weapon systems. They want all 100%. And so they are willing to risk the very relationship that we have to steal that remaining 1%.
So why were they released back to Israel, and who was the person who allowed their release?
Yeah, they were released back to Israel because they're Israeli. If they had been from any other country, they would probably still be in prison for espionage. But that decision would come, but really it would come from the attorney general after being cleared with the president or the chief of staff, the national security advisor.
Hmm. Um, I have another one for you actually that was very shortly afterward. There was another major Israeli spy operation that was busted in the 2000s. It involved the Department of Defense Office of Special Plans that was headed by Paul Wolfowitz and Douglas Feith, members of the neoconservative Project for a New American Century, or PNAC. They're also authors of the Clean Break Report with Richard Wormser on behalf of Benjamin Netanyahu. That report argued for Israel's dual containment strategy against Iraq and Iran, desired to overthrow those governments, which they did immediately afterward. Their office was found to have a major leak that went straight to Israel. What was going on in Paul Wolfowitz and Doug Feith's offices?
I don't think that Paul Wolfowitz and Doug Feith and OVP, David Addington or Scooter Libby or any of those neocons uh, took the threat of Israeli counterintelligence seriously. On the contrary, I think they helped to abet Israeli counterintelligence operations. These are guys who see our relationship with Israel as being so close as to be one. And so if the Israelis are spying on us, well, their argument is we're going to give them the information anyway. And they're just trying to make sure that they get everything that we promise we're going to give them. And so I don't think any of these guys ever believed that the Israelis were any kind of a threat to us, counterintelligence or otherwise. Now that's silly, of course, because of course they're a threat. And of course they've always spied on us. And of course they continue to spy on us. But I think that they just won't allow themselves to believe that there's a downside to it.
There might be an Israeli spy on our government right now. Least that's what Steve Bannon
There
argues
likely is.
about
Yeah.
CIA Director John Ratcliffe. He's one of the largest recipients of APAC cash, and he's someone that organization privately refers to as their lifeline in the administration. When it was time to bomb Iran, he personally handed Trump Mossad's own cooked up intelligence on the supposed threat of Iran's non existent nuclear weapons. Is Steve Bannon correct to be suspicious? And
Yes,
you share his, yeah.
I do. Yes. I do. You know, when we're vetting these cabinet level positions, they look at every stock trade and every transfer from account A to account B and did you ever smoke weed and did you ever beat your wife? Why are we not concerned about possible allegations of espionage? I don't understand it. For me personally, I would never put a person rather in a position of authority if they had taken the kind of money that John Ratcliffe has taken. I wouldn't be able to sleep at night thinking that, perhaps the Israelis have something that's hanging over John Ratcliffe's head. Look at Tulsi Gabbard. Tulsi Gabbard didn't take Israeli money. So why would John Ratcliffe?
Right. I have a question about another aspect of Israeli surveillance, or I guess it's American surveillance, but really it's Israeli. It's about Palantir. This was a company that was created as the CIA funded revival of total information awareness. That's the CIA
Mhm.
program that was first conceived by Iran-Contra figures like John Poindexter,
Mhm.
who argued that maintaining American power required policing dissent as home as much as fighting enemies abroad, kind of like Oliver North said in his Iran-Contra Senate testimony that we didn't lose the war in Vietnam. We lost it in American cities. And in that vein, in the 2000s, Peter Thiel, Alex Karp, and Joe Lonsdale got billions from the CIA's venture capital firm
Mhm.
in QTEL and built Palantir, which has since worked with nearly every U.S. agency, including the
Mhm.
NSA. It filters data from mass surveillance programs like X-Keyscore. But Palantir today isn't only integrated into the American security state, it's also deeply embedded in Israel's. Its leadership is openly fanatical in their Zionism. They boast about supplying Israel with AR targeting tools used in Gaza for their genocide. And when asked about whether they agree with how Israel uses Palantir's products, their co founder, Peter Thiel, says that his preference is simply to defer to Israel. Israel and the United States, though, are two different countries, right? I mean, sometimes their interests align, but often they don't. And so, my question is, do you see a national security risk in the fact that the company with the most authoritarian surveillance tools on the planet, an American company, openly says that it defers to a foreign government, Israel?
Oh, yeah, 100%. And see, in a case like that, there ought to be a law that compels congressional oversight. If there's going to be a transfer of technology, especially of technology that's this highly classified and US developed, there should be some sort of congressional notification so that the policymakers and the lawmakers know that this is happening. And, it would set up a mechanism by which the FBI could later investigate if there's an illegal technology transfer. But we don't have anything like that. We just give the Israelis everything they want, whether it's government to government or private company to government.
Let me ask you another shady character who's surprisingly also involved in the surveillance world. It's Trump's largest donor. It's Sheldon Adelson's widow,
Yeah.
Miriam
Uh-huh.
Adelson. They operated the Sands Casino together with her deceased husband, Sheldon Adelson, with hotels and casinos in Vegas and Macau.
Hmm.
Adelson, like the previous owner of Sands Casino, the gangster Meyer Lansky, is a major Zionist and also, like Lansky, is probably mobbed up and a criminal. His hotels in Macau are notorious for their collaboration with the triads. Well, he was also, like Meyer Lansky, of interest to the American security state, who used Sands on at least one occasion and probably many more. Court filings revealed that when the CIA hired a Spanish surveillance company to spy on Julian Assange while he was trapped in London's Ecuador embassy, it was Sands Casino and its security staff, led by Israelis, who contracted the firm on the CIA's behalf. More than that, the Chinese government has basically banned its officials from ever staying at Sands casinos in Macau because they say Adelson was running a big CIA blackmail operation there. That's what the Chinese government believes. What were Sheldon Adelson's intelligence connections, and why would the CIA turn to someone like Adelson to do their operations?
I don't know the answer to the last part of your question. I listen, I always believed Sheldon Adelson was a very dark figure in contemporary intelligence. He's the guy who paid out of his own pocket, probably illegally, to move the American embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, for example. He is as Israeli, as Zionist as they come. It just doesn't get any more, it didn't get any more Zionist than Sheldon Adelson. He also gave more than $100 million to the Trump campaign in 2016, and his widow gave another $100 million to the Trump campaign in 2024. So there had to be some sort of a quid pro quo. People don't do this kind of thing out of the goodness of their hearts. Sheldon Adelson was getting something for it, and and I think he probably was some sort of a middleman, where he was working for the Israelis, but he was probably also working for the CIA. And you give the Israelis information on the United States, but you give the CIA information on China, and that way everybody's happy, and you just keep doing it. He had more money than you could count in a lifetime. So that wasn't the issue. I think the issue was power, control, maybe to a lesser extent patriotism, misguided as it might have been.
Patriotism toward Israel.
Yeah.
Right. Um, You know what? I have one final question for you. It's about the media. It's something I was wanting to ask last time. Now, Glenn Greenwald always says that the CIA doesn't need Operation Mockingbird anymore because that program is just
Yeah.
no longer necessary. All the
Right.
corporate media just for decades has recited CIA propaganda without any
Yeah.
pressure or infiltration necessary. They just do it willingly. When you were at the CIA, though, were there any journalists, maybe David Ignatius, Carl Bernstein, Jennifer Griffin, that the CIA could just consistently count on to
Oh
regurgitate their
yeah.
propaganda? Yeah.
Oh, sure, sure, sure. Um, yeah, Bob Woodward, number one, maybe tied for number one, was Ignatius. And he's essentially the CIA's scribe. But I agree with Glenn Greenwald. The CIA doesn't need Operation Mockingbird anymore. There's no money anymore for investigative journalism. So what most journalists do is they'll just call the CIA's Office of Public Affairs, have a statement emailed over, and then they just gist the statement, put it in their own words, and call it an article. So why pay to recruit American journalists when they just do what you want for free? There's an interesting story about Jason Leopold, who's a just an absolutely fantastic investigative journalist at Bloomberg. Jason has had a long career. He was at the LA Times, he was at Vice, he was all over the place. But he was once called by the Bush Pentagon, excuse me, Pentagon spokesman. He was once called a FOIA terrorist because he had filed more Freedom of Information Act requests than any other person in the world. He broke the Hillary Clinton email scandal, for example, just by filing a FOIA request. Well, he told me once that he was bored one night and he didn't really have anything happening. So he just filled out a FOIA form, sent it to the CIA asking for all correspondence between the CIA's Office of Public Affairs and all American journalists. Everything. And what happens is the CIA never responds. So Jason had an attorney, Jeffrey Light, who's a well-known, he's retired now, but he was a well-known FOIA attorney. And so on day 61, when the CIA hasn't responded, and invariably they had never responded, they sue the CIA. They always win. The judge orders the CIA to release the documents. So this is what happened. Most of what he found was garbage. But two stories came out of that FOIA tranche. Was that one was that Ken Delanian, the head national
NBC.
security reporter for NBC and MSNBC, was actually writing articles and sending them to the CIA for clearance before sending them to his own editors. In- Incredible, unfathomable. But then he also found a very angry email from the CIA to a journalist saying, So help us God, if you publish that article, you will never be invited to the CIA Christmas party ever again, and we will never give you another interview. And no article was ever published. So why pay good money to recruit American journalists when it's illegal? But also, you just bully them into doing whatever you want.
Right. And one of the benefits of independent media, and I'll just say this, thank God, less and less people trust corporate media anymore, and that there's independent media to replace it. I do worry
Got
though,
that
and
right.
I wonder if you have the same fear as well, that the CIA does still kind of find a way to get its message through on independent media. I'm not sure if you've noticed this. I've seen a number of podcasts now in my YouTube algorithm. They just come up. They just have hundreds of thousands and millions of views, and it's some guy, sometimes from the CIA, just saying why we need to be afraid of Russia and China, or Cuba and Venezuela, which is just the exact message that I would get from a Langley press release. What's going on there?
Yeah, there has to be a program to encourage this kind of thing. The CIA is really resourceful. They have a lot of smart people. They understand algorithms. In many cases, they manipulate algorithms. And so, what better to get your side of the story out than to, control the algorithm and make sure that everybody from, some 16-year-old kid laying in bed at night to you, to me, gets the CIA point of view. This is not what YouTube, for example, had expected or anticipated, but the CIA is constantly working on these kinds of things.
Well, John, it was great to talk to you today. I really appreciate you
Thank
taking
you.
the time.
Good to see you again.
Um,